Emily Carter tore the telegram in half with both hands right there on the platform in front of God and everyone, because the words on it couldn't be real. Deceased. En route. Regret to inform. Her knees nearly went. She had sold 2 horses and her mother's silver brooch to arrange this marriage. She had told herself it would be enough, that a name on a contract could hold a ranch together, that a stranger could save her. Then the train doors opened, and the man who stepped out wasn't a husband. He was something far worse. If you're watching this and you've ever had to hold yourself together when everything fell apart, this story is for you. Please subscribe to our channel, hit the notification bell, and follow along until the very end. Drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. Now let's begin. The telegram had said gentle. It had said hard-working, sober, God-fearing, eager to settle. Emily had read those words so many times, the ink had nearly transferred to her fingertips. She'd carried that paper in her coat pocket for 11 days, unfolding it each morning, the way some women read scripture, not because she believed in miracles, but because she needed something to hold on to. She did not feel gentle when she tore it in half. She felt the cold, clean rip of it, the paper splitting down the middle, and she crushed both halves in her fist and let the wind take them off the platform. Gone. Just like that. The platform at Dust Ridge Station was half frozen and near empty. January had come in hard that year, the kind of cold that got into the wood and warped it, that got into the joints and made old things creak and split. Emily had turned 38 in November, and she felt it in her hands, the ache that lived in her knuckles, now the stiffness that came before dawn. She stood with her shoulders squared and her chin up the way her father had taught her, and she watched the train doors. The station master, old Hap Briggs, said nothing to her. He'd been leaning against the far post with his arms crossed since before the whistle sounded, watching her the way people in small towns watch each other, like observation is a form of ownership. She didn't acknowledge him. She kept her eyes on the train. It had taken 4 months to arrange everything. 4 months of letters exchanged through the Continental Marriage Correspondence Bureau in Denver. 4 months of careful, almost painfully careful wording, because Emily Carter was not a woman who asked for things easily, and she had never in her life asked for a husband. She had run the Rafter Sea alone for 3 years since her father died. She had dug fence posts in frozen ground. She had nursed sick cattle through 2 bad winters. She had watched the debt creep up like floodwater, slow, patient, inevitable. And she had stayed anyway, because that ranch was the only thing left of him. But the debt didn't care about loyalty. The debt was a number on paper held by a bank in Denver, and that number had a due date, and the due date was March 15th. She couldn't make March 15th alone. That was the truth she had finally let herself say out loud alone in the kitchen at 2 in the morning, with the ledger open and the lamp burning low. She couldn't do it alone. She needed another pair of hands, another body. Someone with enough muscle and enough reason to stay and work through spring roundup. A husband, even a stranger. Even a man she'd never looked in the eye was more practical than praying. So she'd written the letters. She'd answered the Bureau's questions. She'd selected a man named Harold Finch from Laramie, Wyoming. A widower, 41, former schoolteacher turned farmer. No criminal record. Good health references provided by 2 town ministers and a county judge. She had not looked at his photograph more than twice. She had not let herself imagine anything beyond the work. The train exhaled a long breath of steam. The doors opened. 3 passengers stepped off. A woman in a gray traveling coat with 2 young children. A drummer with a sample case. And then, stillness. The gap in the doorway. The pause that should have held Harold Finch. What it held instead was something else entirely. He stepped down from the car like a man who knew exactly how much space he took up, and had long since made peace with that fact. He was tall, not just tall, but the kind of tall that reorganized a room, that changed the geometry of a space simply by entering it. His coat was dark and road-worn, and hung open at the front despite the cold. His hat was pulled low. And his face, what she could see of it beneath the shadow of the brim, was not the face of a schoolteacher from Laramie. A scar ran from his left temple, down the side of his jaw, pale and clean and old, like something a blade had left years ago. His eyes were dark, not soft, not gentle, not God-fearing in any way she could recognize. His gaze found her immediately the way a man's gaze does when he already knows who he's looking for. He crossed the platform and stopped 3 feet from her. He didn't offer a hand. He didn't tip his hat. "Emily Carter," he said. "Yes?" She kept her voice flat, steady. She had not lived 3 years alone on a working ranch without learning how to keep her voice steady. "Name's Cole Vance." He reached inside his coat and produced an envelope thick-sealed and held it out to her. "I got something that belongs to you." She took it, but didn't open it. "Where is Harold Finch?" Cole Vance looked at her for a moment. Something moved behind his eyes, not softness exactly, more like the careful settling of a decision already made. "He's dead, ma'am," he said. "3 weeks ago outside of Pueblo. Robbery gone wrong. I found him on the road. He was carrying your letters." The cold went deeper. "He was carrying—" She stopped, started again. "You read my letters?" "No." Flat. Certain. "I didn't read them. I recognized the Bureau's seal and figured there was someone waiting. I brought his effects." He nodded at the envelope in her hand. "That's everything he had on him." Emily looked down at the envelope. She did not open it. She was very aware suddenly of Hap Briggs watching them from across the platform, of the drama she was making whether she wanted to or not, of the way a woman's grief is always public property in a town this size. "I'm sorry for your loss," Cole said, and she believed him, which surprised her. "He wasn't mine to lose," she said. "We'd never met." Still a loss. She looked back up at him. He hadn't moved. He was watching her with that same settled, patient attention, and she had the strange, unsettling sense that he was waiting for something specific, not for her to cry, not for her to fall apart, but for her to arrive at something on her own. "Why are you still here?" she asked. "I've got a proposition for you." "You've got—" She almost laughed. It wasn't funny. "Mr. Vance, I don't know who you are. I don't know where you came from, and I've just been told that the arrangement I spent 4 months building is—" She stopped, drew a breath. "What kind of proposition?" "The kind that solves your problem," he said. "Or most of it. You don't know my problem. You're a woman alone on a working ranch in January with debts coming due in spring. You came to this platform today to meet a husband because you needed one." His voice was even, not unkind, not cruel, just precise in the way a man is precise when he has decided to be honest and wants to get it done. "That's not a guess. That's what the situation is." She said nothing for a moment. The wind moved between them. Somewhere behind her, she could hear the train beginning to breathe itself back toward motion. "Marry me instead," Cole Vance said. "I'll work the ranch through to spring. I'll help you make March 15th. After that, we reassess." Emily Carter stared at him. "That," she said slowly, "is the single most extraordinary thing anyone has ever said to me." "Probably. You're a stranger. You have a scar on your face that did not come from farming. You arrived on a train in January carrying a dead man's letters, and now you're standing on this platform asking me to marry you. Do you understand how this sounds?" "I do," he said. "Then why?" "Because I need somewhere to be," he said. "And you need someone to be here. It doesn't have to be more than that." She looked at him for a long time. The train was pulling away now, slow and grinding, and inevitable, and the platform felt smaller without its noise and bulk, and the cold was very real, and she was very tired, and March 15th was 53 days away. She opened the envelope. Inside was a folded letter. She didn't read a small tin-type photograph of a man she would never meet, a worn leather coin purse with $3 and some cents, and a ring, plain silver, modest-sized, for a woman's hand. Her ring. The one she'd sent ahead as the Bureau required the token of intention, the small gesture that had meant she was serious. Harold Finch had carried it all the way from Laramie, and he'd died with it in his pocket, and now a stranger was handing it back to her on a frozen platform in Dust Ridge, Colorado. She closed her hand around it. "I'm not going to decide this on a train platform," she said. "Fair enough. If I say yes, and I am not saying yes, it is a business arrangement, nothing more. You work the ranch, I run the household. We present ourselves as married to satisfy the bank and to stop the town from," she paused, "from being what this town is." "Understood." "You sleep in the bunkhouse." "Understood." "And if at any point I ask you to leave, you leave." He looked at her steadily. "If at any point you ask me to leave," he said, "I'll leave." She put the ring in her coat pocket. "I'll give you an answer by tomorrow morning," she said. "There's a boarding house on 4th Street. Mrs. Aldridge runs it. She's fair. You can get supper there." She turned to go. "Miss Carter?" She stopped. "I'm not a good man," Cole Vance said. "Not proud, not ashamed. Just accurate the way a man is when he's done pretending otherwise. I want you to know that going in, whatever you decide." Emily Carter turned her head just enough to see him in her peripheral vision. Tall still, the scar catching the flat winter light. "I'm not a gentlewoman," she said, "so we're even." She walked off the platform alone. That night, she did not sleep. She sat at the kitchen table, with the ledger open in front of her, and the lamp turned low, and she went through the numbers for the last time. Not because she didn't know them, she knew them the way she knew her own heartbeat, but because she owed it to herself to be certain. To make sure she wasn't choosing from fear. To make sure she was choosing from the only thing she had left that still worked her head. The Rafter Sea ran 460 acres. Some of it decent grassland, some of it rocky. Nothing that had no purpose except to make the decent land feel earned. She had 12 head of cattle left after the losses of the past 2 winters. 3 horses, 1 old one, young one borrowed on a handshake from a neighbor who was losing patience, and a barn that needed a new roof before April, or she'd lose what little hay she had left to rain. She had 1 ranch hand, a boy named Toby, 16 years old, who worked for meals and a corner of the bunkhouse, and who was worth twice that. And she had a debt of $412 to the Cattlemen's Bank of Denver, due on March 15th, at which point a man named Gerald Morse would arrive from the city with a letter of default and a very particular expression of polite regret. She had $51. She was not going to make it alone. She thought about Cole Vance. She thought about the way he'd said, "I'm not a good man," not as an apology and not as a confession, but as information. Like he wanted her to have accurate data. She had met men in her life who weren't good and who told you they were wonderful, and she had met men who were good and told you they were nothing, and she had met very few who told you plainly what they were and looked you in the eye while they did it. She thought about the scar. She thought about what kind of trouble followed a man through a train door in January. Then she thought about Gerald Morse with his letter and his expression, and she thought about what it would mean to walk away from her father's land. She closed the ledger. She went to bed. At 6 in the morning, she was at Mrs. Aldridge's boarding house. Cole Vance was already awake. He answered the door to his room before she'd finished knocking fully dressed coat already on like a man who doesn't sleep particularly deep and has no expectations about whether a morning will be peaceful. "Yes," Emily said. He studied her face. "You sure?" "No," she said. "But I'm doing it anyway." Something shifted in his expression, not quite relief, not quite surprise, something quieter than both. "All right," he said. "The Justice of the Peace is Reverend Aldous Gates. He opens his office at 8. It's a 10-minute walk. I'll be ready." She turned to go, then stopped because there was one more thing, and she'd told herself she'd say it so she would. Cole. First name. It felt strange in her mouth. "Whatever it is you're running from." She paused. "I have to know it's not going to come to my door." The silence that followed was not long, but it was deliberate. "I can't promise that," he said. She had not expected honesty. She had expected reassurance. Reassurance she would have seen through and resented. "All right," she said. "Then I need to know you'll stand and face it when it comes. Not run, not disappear in the night and leave me holding whatever you've pulled behind you." "That I can promise," he said. And his voice when he said it was the most certain thing she'd heard since she tore that telegram apart. She nodded once. 8 o'clock, she said. Don't be late. She walked back down the stairs and out into the cold, and the January morning pressed against her face, like something real and impossible to avoid, and she thought, this is the stupidest thing I have ever done. And then she thought, no. The stupid thing would have been to let the ranch go. She had made her choice. Now she had to live inside it. Reverend Gates was a small, precise man who had performed a great many weddings in his career and had long since learned not to ask too many questions about the circumstances. He asked the standard questions. He received the standard answers. He wrote the names in the register: Emily Ruth Carter and Cole James Vance, and he pronounced them married in the eyes of the law and God, and the whole thing took 11 minutes. Toby was the witness. She'd woken him at 7 and told him flatly that she was getting married that morning and she needed him at the justice's office. He'd stared at her with his young, unguarded face and said, "To who?" And she'd said, "A man named Cole Vance." And he'd said, "Where'd he come from?" And she'd said, "The train." And that had been the end of the conversation. Toby shook Cole's hand after the ceremony with the gravity of a boy who understands he is in the presence of a significant moment, even if he doesn't understand all its dimensions. Cole looked at him steadily and said, "You work hard, son." "Yes, sir." "Good. We've got a lot of it ahead of us." They drove back to the ranch in the wagon, the three of them mostly in silence. The road was rutted and frozen, and the horses picked their way with the unhappy care of animals who would rather be in a barn. Emily drove. Cole sat beside her on the bench, not touching, leaving a deliberate, careful distance between them that she noted without comment. Halfway to the ranch, he said, "Tell me about the debts." So she did. She told him the number, the date, the name of the man who held the note. She told him about the roof on the barn, and the hay situation, and the state of the cattle. She told him about the fences on the north end that had been letting stock drift since October, and the pump in the yard that ran slow when the temperature dropped below 20. She told him all of it precisely without decoration, the way she told herself, because it was information, and information was what you needed to make decisions. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "The north fences," he said. "How far? Half a mile of line, maybe more." "I'll start there Monday." "The barn roof is more urgent." "Then I'll start there Monday," he said, without hesitation, without making her feel like she'd corrected him. She glanced at him sideways. "You know construction?" she asked. "I know enough," he said. "You know cattle?" "Some." "What do you know a lot of?" He was quiet for a moment. The wagon creaked. One of the horses exhaled loudly into the cold. "People," he said finally. "I know people." She didn't ask what he meant. She thought she understood in the way you understand something you'd rather not examine too closely. When they pulled up to the yard, she showed him the bunkhouse, small, cold, with 2 bunks and a stove that worked if you coaxed it, and she showed him where the tools were kept and where the feed was stored, and she introduced him to the horses by name because the horses were her business, and she needed to know he'd treat them right. He spoke to them quietly one by one, with his hand flat, and offered. The old horse, she called him Gus, put his nose against Cole's palm and huffed, and something about the way Cole stood with him, patient and still, told Emily more than anything he'd said on the platform or in the justice's office. A man who knows horses is a man who knows how to wait, her father used to say. A man who rushes horses rushes everything, and nothing good comes of rushing. "I'll get started on supper," she said. 7 o'clock. Bunkhouse has a lamp, but if you need anything else, I'll manage, he said. "All right." She walked to the house. She stood inside the door for a moment, with her hand still on the latch, listening to the sound of him outside. Footsteps, the low murmur of his voice talking to the horse again, the creak of the barn door, and she felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Not safe. She wasn't fool enough to call it that, but not entirely alone either. She took off her coat. She put her ring, her own ring returned to her by a dead man's good luck and a stranger's decency, on her left hand for the first time. It fit. She went to make supper. That night at the table, Toby ate like the 16-year-old he was, and said almost nothing, which was unusual. He kept watching Cole the way a young dog watches a new animal in the yard, not hostile, but measuring. Cole ate steadily and didn't force conversation. Finally, Toby said, "You ever worked a ranch before, Mr. Vance?" "Some." "Where?" "Different places." Toby processed this. "You're not from Colorado?" "No." "Where are you from?" "Toby," Emily said. "It's all right." Cole set down his fork. He looked at Toby directly with the full weight of his attention. "I'm from a lot of places, son. None of them quiet. I came here because this looked like a place worth working for." Toby thought about this. "Miss Carter's place is worth working for," he said with a seriousness that was almost comical in a boy his age. "I can see that," Cole said. And he looked at Emily when he said it, just for a moment, just long enough for her to feel it, and then he looked back at his plate. She picked up her coffee cup and held it with both hands and said nothing. Outside, the wind had come up again, driving down off the mountains, the way it did in January, the way it had every January of her life on that land. She heard it in the eaves, the long familiar moan of it, the sound she'd grown up with, and had never been able to decide if she found comforting or desolate. Tonight, it sounded like something in between. Cole Vance had been a stranger on a platform this morning. Tonight, he was her husband in the eyes of the law, and her hired hand in all practical purposes, and something undefined and uncomfortable in the space between those two things. She had lived alone long enough to have organized her life around her own edges, to know exactly where she ended and the world began. His presence disrupted that. Not violently, not rudely, just the way a large piece of furniture disrupts a room you thought you'd arranged for good. You couldn't unsee the new proportion of things. She would manage it. She had managed everything else. "Toby," she said, "you've got the East pasture check at first light." "Yes, ma'am." "Cole, I'll walk you through the north fence line tomorrow if the weather holds. I want you to see what we're dealing with before you start tearing anything apart." "Yes, ma'am," Cole said, and he said it exactly the way Toby had, with the same uncomplicated compliance. And something about that, the equality of it. The lack of condescension steadied her in a way she hadn't expected. She stood and began to clear the table. He was on his feet before she'd picked up the second plate. "I'll get these," he said. She looked at him. "Bunkhouse kitchen or here?" he asked. "Here," she said and stepped aside. He washed the plates at the basin and she dried them, and they stood together in the small kitchen in the lamplight without speaking, and the work organized itself around them, the way work does, finding its rhythm, finding its ease, and when it was done, he took his coat off the hook and said, "Good night, Miss Carter." And she said, "Good night, Cole." And he went out into the cold. She stood at the window and watched the light appear in the bunkhouse, the small gold square of it against the dark. She stood there for a long time. "I'm not a good man." His voice in her memory, even and plain. "Then we're even," she had told him. She hadn't slept in 30 hours. She went to bed. She dreamed about nothing she could remember, which was the best kind of sleep. In the morning, he was already in the barn when she came out at 5:30. She could hear him talking to the horses. She could hear Gus's low answering sound. She stood in the yard in the dark with her breath clouding and the stars still thick overhead, and she listened, and she thought, whatever he is, and wherever he came from, and whatever comes through that door eventually because of him, and she didn't finish the thought. She let it be unfinished. Because she had $51 and a ranch worth saving, and a man who talked quietly to old horses in the dark before first light, and that was what she had, and that was what she was going to work with. She went to start the coffee. The day began. The coffee was always ready by 5:45. That was the first thing Cole Vance learned about Emily Carter. Not that she was stubborn, not that she was precise, not that she carried her grief the way other women carried jewelry, close and private, and never quite off. He learned the coffee first because the coffee was the shape of her mornings, and her mornings were the shape of everything else. He didn't comment on it. He just showed up at 5:50, knocked once on the back door, and accepted the cup she handed him without ceremony. They drank standing at the kitchen window, watching the dark outside begin to separate itself into the individual shapes of morning barn fence post, the old cottonwood at the edge of the yard, and they said very little because there was work to do and the work didn't require talking about. That was the second thing he learned. She didn't talk to fill silence. She talked when she had something to say. He respected that more than he could have explained. The north fence line took 3 days. Cole pulled the rusted staples himself, reset the posts that had heaved out of the frozen ground and stretched new wire with the methodical patience of a man who has done hard physical work long enough to understand that fighting it only costs you more than it gives. Toby worked beside him, learning the technique without being taught it explicitly, just watching, adjusting, keeping pace. Cole noticed the boy was smart in that quiet, practical way that doesn't show up in school but shows up everywhere else. On the third afternoon, when they were nearly done, Toby said without looking up from the wire he was splicing, "Miss Carter had 2 other men come through here last spring, before she wrote those letters." Cole kept working. "That's so." One was a drifter looking for seasonal pay. Other was a man from town who said he wanted to buy the place. Toby pulled the wire taut. She sent them both off inside an hour. "She's particular. She's smart," Toby said, with the firmness of a boy defending something he's made up his mind about. "She knew what they were after." Cole glanced at him then. "What were they after?" "The water rights," Toby said. "Rafter C sits on the best spring in the county. Everybody knows it. Everybody's been waiting on her to fail so they can pick it up cheap." Cole was quiet for a moment. "Who in particular," he said slowly, "has been doing the waiting?" Toby looked at him. Some calculation moved behind the boy's young face. "Man named Gerald Morse," he said. "He's the one from the Denver bank, but there's talk that he's not working for just the bank." "Talk," Cole said. "From who?" "From everybody. Nobody says it out loud, but everybody knows he's been buying up land in this county for 2 years. Every ranch that goes under Morse shows up first. Always first. Always with a better offer than the bank could have made on its own." Cole set down the pliers. "Does Emily know this?" he asked. Toby looked at him like the question itself was the answer. "She knows," the boy said. "She's known since last spring. That's why she won't sell, even if selling would clear the debt. Because selling to Morse means it's not just losing the land. It's losing it to him." Cole picked up the pliers again. He didn't say anything else for a long time, but inside, he was turning the information over and over the way you turn a stone in your hand to find its heaviest side. Gerald Morse, a banker who arrived first at every failure. A man with patterns. Cole knew men with patterns. He'd worked for one. That evening at supper, he told Emily what Toby had said flatly and without softening it because she was a woman who wanted accurate data, and he had decided to give her that. She set down her fork. "I know about Morse," she said. "I figured. What I don't know," she said carefully, "is what he's building. Whether it's his own enterprise or," she stopped, "or whether someone's backing him," Cole said. She looked at him. Yes, he held her gaze. He wanted to tell her. He came close to it, came to the edge of it, the way you come to the edge of a high place and feel the pull of the drop. But he stopped. Because the truth of what he knew and how he knew it would change things between them in ways he wasn't ready for yet, and he needed her to trust him first. Not blindly. Just enough. "I'll look into it," he said. "You'll look into it," she repeated. And there was something in her voice, not quite suspicion, not quite skepticism, but a precise awareness that he was choosing his words. "Cole, you know something." "I know the type of man who buys up failing land through a banker," he said. "I've seen it before. It's not a new game." "Where?" "Texas," he said, which was true as far as it went. She looked at him for a long moment. He could see her deciding pressing or letting it sit. She let it sit. "All right," she said. "Then be careful when you look." "Yes, ma'am." Toby looked between them the way a boy looks when he knows he's in the presence of a conversation that has more floors than the one he can see, and then he quietly helped himself to more potatoes. The barn roof took 5 days and cost Emily the last of her reserve cash for materials, $32, that she counted out on the kitchen table with the controlled, almost theatrical calm of a woman who has learned that reacting to money doesn't change the amount of it. Cole watched her count it and said nothing because there was nothing useful to say. But that night, after she'd gone to bed, he went out to the bunkhouse and opened the lining of his saddlebag and counted what he had. $87. Travel money. The last of what he'd earned before walking away from the life he was walking away from. In the morning, he put $60 on the kitchen table before she came down. He was already outside by the time she found it. She came out to the barn. "What is this?" She had the bills in her hand. "Contribution," he said, not looking up from the stall he was mucking. "Cole." "It's a partnership," he said. "Partnerships have contributions from both sides. This is your money." "It is," he agreed. "I'm not taking your money." Her voice had that particular edge, not anger exactly, more like the sound of a principal meeting a wall. "That's not what we agreed to." He stopped. He turned around and looked at her, and he said with a patience that was not condescending because it carried weight, "Emily, the roof needed $32. You have 51 left. March 15th is 5 weeks away. You cannot get from here to there on $51. He paused. "Let me help. That is what I'm here for." She held the bills. Her jaw was tight. He could see the thing she was fighting, not ingratitude, but the deep structural discomfort of needing something from a person she hadn't finished deciding to trust. "I'll put it toward the debt," she said finally. "As a loan. I'll pay you back after March." "Fine. With interest." "Emily." 2%, she said. "That's fair." He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved in his chest, something he didn't name. 2%, he said. "Fine." She went back inside. He went back to work. But she paused in the doorway just for a second and said without turning around, "Thank you." And she was gone before he could answer. 2 weeks in the routine had settled into something that felt dangerously, improbably, almost natural. She ran the house and the books. He ran the physical labor with Toby at his side. Evenings they shared the table, and the conversation grew slowly the way plants grow in cold soil, not fast, not showy, but real. She told him about her father, about the way he'd built the Rafter Sea from nothing, about the drought of '78 that had nearly broken him, and the flood of '81 that had finished what the drought started, and how he'd rebuilt both times, with the stubborn, unreasonable faith of a man who simply refused to accept that the land had beaten him. Cole listened. The way he listened completely, without interrupting, with the full weight of his attention. And Emily, who had spent 3 years with no one to tell these things to, felt the words come out of her with a force that surprised her, the way water surprises itself when the pressure behind a dam finally finds a crack. "He sounds like a man worth knowing," Cole said. "He was worth knowing," she said. "He was the best man I knew." She said it simply, and Cole nodded, and they sat in the silence of it together, and it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. That was the night she asked him directly. "Cole." She set down her coffee. "What did you do before?" He didn't look away. She'd expected him to. "Enforcer," he said. "For a man named Victor Kane, out of Santa Fe." The name landed on the table between them like something dropped from a height. "Enforcer," she said. "Yes." "What does that mean exactly?" "It means I made sure people honored their obligations," he said, "when they didn't want to." She looked at him steadily. "Did you kill people?" "Yes." The word sat there. He didn't dress it up, and he didn't apologize for it, and she understood in the deep practical part of herself that a man who dresses up his past is more dangerous than a man who names it plainly. "Why did you leave?" she said. "Because Kane ordered me to burn out a family," he said. "A woman and 2 children. Over a debt that wasn't even theirs, it was the husband's, and the husband was dead." His voice was even, but something beneath it was not. "I didn't do it. I left instead." Emily was quiet for a long time. "And Kane," she said. He's not the kind of man who takes that quietly. No, Cole said. He's not. There it was. The thing she'd known was coming since the platform, since I can't promise that. She'd known there was a shape to it, and now she could see the shape a powerful criminal in Santa Fe with a long memory, and a man named Victor Kane, who collected what was owed to him with fire and patience. "How long do you think we have?" she asked. The "we" was not lost on either of them. "I don't know," he said. "I've been moving. That buys time. But Kane has people everywhere, and I've been in one place for 2 weeks now." He paused. "It's not a matter of if." "Then we need to be ready," she said. He stared at her. "Emily, don't," she said. Her voice was quiet and absolute. "Don't tell me to leave or to hide or to let you handle it. This is my land. If trouble comes here, I stand here." He looked at her for a long moment. In the lamplight she was composed and certain, and a little terrifying, and Cole Vance had faced down men with guns who frightened him less. "All right," he said. "Teach me to shoot," she said. He didn't blink. "You don't know how—" "I know how to shoot a rifle," she said. "Varmints the odd coyote. I mean really shoot. Like a person who means it." Something shifted in his face. Not quite a smile. Something older than a smile. Something that had been a smile once, a long time ago. "We start tomorrow," he said. She nodded. She was getting up to clear the plates when the knock came at the front door. Hard. Deliberate. The knock of someone who is not asking permission. Cole was on his feet before she'd fully turned around. He put his hand up, not roughly, just firmly, and she stopped. He moved to the door and stood to the side of it, his hand resting naturally at his hip, and said, "Who's there?" A pause. Then a voice she recognized with a cold that had nothing to do with January. "Gerald Morse, Mr. Vance, from the Cattleman's Bank. I believe we have matters to discuss." Emily went very still. Cole looked at her. She gave him a single small nod. He opened the door. Morse was not what you'd expect from a man who'd been slowly dismantling the county's ranching families for 2 years. He was slight, well-dressed, with the groomed, patient look of a man accustomed to other people feeling at a disadvantage in his presence. He had 2 men with him on the porch, large quiet, the kind of quiet that is a choice rather than a nature. "Mrs. Vance," Morse said, as though the name was something he was tasting. He looked past Cole at Emily with an expression of polished concern. "I'd heard there'd been a development. I wanted to offer my congratulations in person." "It's late for a social call," Emily said. "Indeed. Forgive me." He didn't look sorry. "I won't take much of your time. I simply wanted to make sure you were aware that the terms of the note don't change with marital circumstances. March 15th is March 15th. "I'm aware of that, Mr. Morse." "Good. Good." He smiled. He had the smile of a man who has never once needed it to reach his eyes. "I also wanted to make sure you'd considered my standing offer. Given the difficulties of your situation, a sale would settle everything cleanly. No debt, no deadline. You'd walk away free and clear." "I'm not selling," Emily said. "Not yet," Morse said pleasantly. Cole moved. Not dramatically. He simply adjusted his position just slightly, just enough so that he was standing between Morse and Emily, a shift so natural it might have been accidental, except that nothing about Cole Vance was accidental. Morse looked at him for the first time with real attention. Something passed across his groomed face, recognition maybe, or the outline of it. "You're new to the area, Mr. Vance." "I am," Cole said. "Where are you from?" "Here and there," Cole said. The same words he'd given Toby. Easier than the truth. Morse held his gaze for a moment too long. Then he smiled again, thinner this time. "Well, welcome to Dust Ridge." He put on his hat. "I'll see myself out. Emily, Mrs. Vance. March 15th. Don't forget." He left. The 2 large, quiet men followed him without a word. Cole closed the door. The kitchen was very still. Emily stood with her hands flat on the table, not gripping it, just resting, just grounding herself. "He came here at night," she said. "Yes." That's not a bank call. That's a warning. Yes. She looked up at him. He recognized your name. Cole didn't answer immediately. He was thinking about the way Morse's eyes had shifted that flicker of something more than surprise. Maybe, he said. Cole. Her voice was careful and precise. Does Victor Kane have connections to the land deals in this county? He had been afraid of this question for 2 weeks. He had known it was coming since Toby had said the name Gerald Morse, since the shape of the pattern had started forming in his mind. He had been hoping he was wrong. I think so, he said. Yes. The silence that followed was the longest one they'd shared. Outside, the wind had picked up again, driving down off the mountains the way it always did, and the lamp flame shifted in some small draft from the door, and Emily Carter stood in her kitchen, with her hands flat on the table, and looked at the man she'd married 5 days ago. So, she said very quietly, Kane's money is already here. It's been here. The ranch, my father's ranch. It was already in someone's crosshairs before you ever stepped off that train. It looks that way, Cole said. He didn't soften it. And now you're here too. She paused. Which means this place has become very interesting to very dangerous people. Emily. No. She held up one hand. I'm not angry. I need to think. She was quiet for a moment. You didn't know, she said. You couldn't have known it would connect back here. No, he said. I didn't know. She nodded slowly. But you know now. Which means we both know. She looked at him directly. Which means we deal with it. Cole looked at her. This woman who had torn a telegram on a train platform and offered a stranger terms of a business arrangement on the coldest morning of the year, and counted out her last $32 without flinching, and told him flatly that she stood on her own land, and he felt something that was not quite what he'd expected to feel when he'd followed Harold Finch's effects to a Colorado train station. He felt for the first time in a very long time that he was in the right place. We deal with it, he agreed. She put out the lamp. She went to bed. He went to the bunkhouse, but he didn't sleep. He sat in the dark and thought about Victor Kane and Gerald Morse and the water rights under the Rafter Seas Spring, and he thought about the woman in the house 20 yards away who had said, "We like it" meant something, and who'd looked at him across a kitchen table and asked if he'd killed people, and not flinched when he said yes. He thought about the family Kane had wanted him to burn out. He thought about why he'd walked away. Then he got up, checked the load in his revolver by feel in the dark, and spent the rest of the night listening to the silence between the wind gusts, waiting for whatever sound didn't belong. Nothing came. Not that night. But it was coming. He could feel it the way you feel weather not in your eyes, but in your bones, in the old places where old trouble taught you to pay attention. It was coming. And when it arrived, it wasn't going to knock politely the way Gerald Morse had knocked. The shooting lessons started the morning after Morse's visit. Cole didn't ease her into it. He handed her his revolver in the yard before breakfast. Grip first and said, "Tell me what you know." Emily took it with both hands, checked the cylinder the way she'd seen her father do with his rifle. Deliberate, no hesitation, and looked up. "I know it's loaded. I know you pointed and pull. I know that's not enough." "That's a better start than most," he said. He stood behind her and slightly to the left, not touching, maintaining that careful distance they'd both learned to navigate, and he talked her through it. Stance. Grip. Where the eye needs to go. The difference between shooting at a target and shooting at something that is moving toward you with intent. Don't think about aiming, Bisha, he said. Think about committing. The hesitation is what gets people killed, not the aim. She fired. The recoil surprised her, not the force of it, but the sound, the absolute finality of it. She stood very still for a second afterward. "Again," Cole said. She fired again, closer. Again. By the 6th shot, her hands had stopped shaking. By the 10th, she was hitting what she pointed at with enough consistency that Cole said, "All right," which she'd already learned was his highest available form of praise. "How long until I'm good at this?" she asked. "You're already good at it," he said. You've got steady hands and you don't flinch. That's the hard part. He reloaded for her. What you need now is to do it when you're scared. I'm scared now, she said. He looked at her. I know, he said. You're doing it anyway. That's what I mean. She handed the revolver back to him. Their fingers overlapped on the grip for just a second, accidental brief, and neither of them commented on it. Toby appeared from the barn door with the expression of a boy who has been watching through a gap in the boards and knows he's been caught. You gonna teach me too? He called. Get back to work, Emily and Cole said simultaneously in exactly the same tone. Toby disappeared. Emily looked sideways at Cole. Something almost happened in her expression. Not quite a smile, but the shape of where a smile had been and might be again. She went in to start breakfast. Cole stood in the yard with the revolver in his hand and watched the road. 3 days after the shooting lesson, a rider came down from town. Not Morse. A young man named Peter Aldous, the Reverend's nephew, who worked odd jobs and delivered messages for whoever paid, and he arrived at a canter, which meant the message was urgent. He handed Emily a folded paper without getting off his horse and said, From the Mercantile, ma'am. Mr. Stanhope said it came through on the wire this morning. He turned and rode back before she could ask anything. Emily opened the paper. She read it once. Then she walked into the barn where Cole was working and handed it to him without a word. He read it. It was a telegram forwarded from the Denver office of the Cattlemen's Bank, addressed to the account holder of the Rafter C note. Brief, formal, devastating. The terms of her debt had been transferred. Effective immediately, the note was held not by the Cattlemen's Bank, but by a land acquisition company called Western Meridian Holdings. New payment instructions would follow. Any previous arrangements were null. Cole looked up from the paper. Western Meridian Holdings, he said. Have you heard of it? He folded the telegram slowly. It's one of Kane's, he said. One of his shell companies. He uses them to hold property at arm's length. He set it down on the workbench between them. He didn't just back Morse. He's bought your debt directly. Emily stood very still. Then she said, He's done this before, with other properties. Yes. So whatever happens on March 15th, whether I pay or I default, the money goes to Victor Kane. If you pay, Cole said, you pay him and you keep the land. If you default, he takes the land at a fraction of what it's worth. Either way. Either way, he wins something, Emily said. Her voice was controlled. The control was costing her something. Either way, he profits from whatever happens here, whether you're here or not. Cole said nothing, because there was nothing to say that she hadn't already seen clearly. This was already happening before you came, she said. My father's ranch, the water rights, it was already targeted. You arriving just... She stopped. You just made the timeline visible. Emily, I'm not blaming you. She looked at him directly. I'm understanding the situation. There's a difference. She took the telegram back and folded it precisely and put it in her coat pocket. I need to go to town. I need to talk to a lawyer. I'll come with you. No, she said. He studied her. No. If you ride into Dust Ridge beside me, you become the story. People will talk about the stranger and forget to listen to what I'm saying. She met his gaze steadily. I've been managing this town's opinions for 3 years. Let me do it. He didn't like it. She could see he didn't like it. But he nodded. I'll be here when you get back. I know you will, she said, and the certainty in her voice, the simple, unremarked faith of it, landed somewhere in his chest and stayed there. She went to town alone. The lawyer in Dust Ridge was a man named Calvin Reese, elderly precise, a former territorial judge who'd seen enough frontier fraud to recognize the shape of it before the details filled in. He read the telegram over his reading glasses and was quiet for a long time. Western Meridian Holdings, he said finally. You know it. I know the pattern. He set the paper down. Emily, This is the third note transfer I've seen in 14 months. The Crawford place, the Hanson homestead, both went to auction inside of 60 days. He looked at her. Neither family ever saw a cent beyond the debt settlement. Can I fight it? On what grounds? On the grounds that this is not a legitimate banking transaction, that it's a fraudulent mechanism to acquire land through manufactured debt. Reese looked at her for a long moment. That's a sophisticated argument, he said carefully. It's the correct argument, she said. Is it winnable? It would need documentation, he said. Evidence that Western Meridian is a shell that the beneficial owner is operating through it to circumvent normal banking regulation. That's not easy to establish. But possible. With the right paperwork. Possibly. He leaned back. Do you know who's behind this company? She paused. I have a strong suspicion. A name. She considered. Not yet, she said. Let me confirm it first. Reese studied her over his glasses. Emily, be careful who you're up against. I'm always careful, she said. I just need to know I have legal ground to stand on when the time comes. I'll pull what I can on the holding company, he said. Give me a week. She rode back to the ranch in the late afternoon and went directly to the kitchen and sat down at the table and opened the ledger. Not to look at the numbers, she knew the numbers. She opened it because the act of opening it was the act of not giving up, and she needed to perform that act concretely and physically in that moment. Cole came in 20 minutes later. He read her face and didn't ask how it went. He put the coffee on. When he set the cup in front of her and sat down across the table, she said, I need to see everything you know about Kane's operation, how he structures things, how he documents transactions, what paper trails he leaves. Cole was quiet for a moment. Why? Because I'm going to build a legal case, she said. If I can prove the debt transfer is part of a fraudulent scheme, if I can tie Western Meridian to Kane and Kane to Morse, and show that this was designed specifically to circumvent legitimate banking law, a judge might void the note entirely. She looked at him steadily. That's the only way out of this, that doesn't end with him winning something. Cole looked at her for a long time. Something moved in his face that she couldn't quite read, admiration maybe, or the recognition of something he hadn't expected to find. You're going to beat a criminal empire with paperwork, he said. I'm going to beat it with the law, she said, which is what it's most afraid of. He was quiet. Then he said, What do you need? Everything, she said. Company names, associated accounts if you know them, the names of men he uses in different territories, how he typically structures land acquisitions. She paused. And Cole, I need to know if there are other properties in this county connected to Kane beyond Morse. He turned the coffee cup in his hands. Once. Twice. I know of two, he said. The mill on the North Road and the feed operation on the county line. Both legitimate businesses. On the surface. She wrote both down. All right, she said. Tell me everything. He told her. He talked for an hour and a half, systematically, and without embellishment, while she wrote in the margins of the ledger pages and asked precise clarifying questions that told him she was organizing what he gave her in real time, building architecture out of information. She had the mind of a woman who had been running a complex operation alone for 3 years, not just surviving it, but understanding it at a level most men in her position would not have bothered with. When he finished, she sat back and looked at what she'd written. This is enough to start, she said. Not enough to win, but enough to give Reese something to work with. Emily. He said her name with a weight she noticed. When Kane finds out you're building a case, he'll accelerate, she said. Yes, I know. She met his gaze directly. Which is why we need the legal framework established before he does. We need to be in a courtroom before he can put men on a road. And if he puts men on the road anyway. She held his gaze for a very long moment. Then I shoot straighter than they do, she said. It was not a joke. Cole understood it was not a joke. The following morning, Toby found the warning. He came running from the south gate before breakfast, breathing hard, holding something in his hand. He thrust it at Cole without preamble, a piece of paper nailed to the gatepost, written in a plain, careful hand. Your husband is a dead man walking. You'd do well to sell before you become one too. Last friendly offer. A friend. Cole read it. Emily read it over his shoulder. Toby said, I didn't see anyone. Gate was open. Someone cut the chain in the night. Emily turned to Cole. Her face was very composed. They came onto the property. Yes. In the night, while we were sleeping. Yes. Toby looked at the paper with an expression that had gone very young, very fast. Are we in danger? He asked. Emily looked at the boy 16 years old, no family to speak of, working for meals in a bunk, and she made a decision in that moment that she felt all the way through her. Toby, she said, I need you to listen to me carefully. You can leave. I'll understand it completely, and I'll think no less of you. But if you stay, she paused. If you stay knowing what this is, not as a ranch hand, as someone who's chosen to be here. Toby looked at the paper. Then he looked at her. Then he looked at Cole. Cole said nothing. He waited. I've got nowhere better to be, Toby said. It was the kind of statement that sounds simple until you hear what's underneath it, and what was underneath it was the declaration of a boy who had decided to become something more than a boy, right there in the morning cold with a threat letter in Cole's hand. Emily nodded once. Then you learn everything Cole teaches you, she said. You do exactly what we say when we say it, and you do not go anywhere alone. Understood? Yes, ma'am. Cole looked at the road. They're testing the response time, he said. They left a note instead of taking action because they want to see if we run. We don't run, Emily said. No, he agreed. But we need to give them the impression we might. Buy time. He turned to her. Write Morse. Tell him you want to discuss terms. Don't agree to anything, just open a conversation. Emily stared at him. That's you want me to pretend to consider selling. I want you to slow them down while the legal case builds, Cole said. Every week Reese has is a week Kane doesn't move. She didn't like it. He could see she didn't like it, not because the strategy was wrong, but because it required performing uncertainty she didn't feel, and Emily Carter had built her life on not pretending. But she was also a woman who understood the difference between principle and suicide. One letter, she said, and it commits to nothing. One letter commits to nothing. She wrote it that afternoon, precise and careful, and wrote it to the post herself, and when she came back, she went out to the yard and fired 20 more rounds at the fence post she'd been using as a target, and every single one hit. Cole watched from the barn door and said nothing. That evening, something changed between them. Not dramatically, not with a declaration or a grand gesture. Those were for people who hadn't already chosen each other under duress and found the choice held. It was smaller than that. She brought his coffee to the bunkhouse for the first time since he'd arrived. She knocked, and he opened the door, and she handed him the cup, and she said, You should eat inside tonight. It's colder than yesterday. He looked at her. Emily, don't make it complicated, she said. It's warmer at the table. He came inside. They sat at the table and ate, and Toby fell asleep halfway through his plate, as 16-year-olds do when the adrenaline finally clears, and Emily looked at the sleeping boy and said quietly, I keep thinking about what happens to him if this goes wrong. It won't go wrong, Cole said. You can't promise that. No, he said. But I can promise I'll do everything in my power to make sure it goes right. He paused. That's not nothing. I know it's not nothing, she said. She looked at him across the table. This man she'd married on a January morning because she needed a pair of hands and a name on a license. This man who had held a revolver to her grip and told her that hesitation kills, who had spent an hour and a half giving her information that put him at risk, who had sat in the dark all night listening for footsteps that hadn't come yet. She looked at him and understood something that she hadn't expected to need to understand when she tore that telegram apart on the platform. She had stopped being afraid of him somewhere in the past 3 weeks. She hadn't noticed it happening, but the fear was gone, and what had replaced it was something considerably more complicated and considerably more dangerous to her self-possession. She stood and began to clear the plates. He stood to help. Their hands met again over the basin, accidental brief the same as before, except this time neither of them moved away immediately. A second, maybe two. Then she stepped back, and he stepped back, and the moment passed cleanly, the way the best moments do, without being named. "Good night, Cole," she said. "Good night," he said. He took his coat and went to the bunkhouse. She stood at the window again and watched the light. She was still standing there when she heard it distant low south of the fence line. A sound that didn't belong to wind or cattle or the settling of the house. Horses. Multiple horses. Moving fast. Moving toward them. She had the rifle off the wall before she'd finished processing the sound. She was already at the door when Cole came through it from the outside, moving fast, his revolver drawn, his face absolutely clear of everything except the immediate and necessary. "They're not waiting," he said. "No," she said. "They're not." Toby woke at the sound of the door and was on his feet in 3 seconds, young and wide-eyed and steady, and Emily thought, good boy, good boy. And then there was no more time for thinking, because the riders were at the gate, and the gate was open because someone had cut the chain, and the first torch arced through the January dark like a falling star and landed on the barn roof. Her barn. Her father's barn. The roof Cole had spent 5 days fixing with $32 of her last reserve. It caught. Emily Carter stood in the doorway of her house with a rifle in her hands and watched it burn and felt something inside her go absolutely permanently quiet. The part that had been afraid, the part that had been uncertain, the part that had been trying to hold herself together with bookkeeping and routine and careful distance from the man beside her. That part went quiet. What replaced it was something she didn't have a gentle name for. Cole's hand came to her arm, not restraining her, just present, just there. "Emily." "I see them," she said. Her voice was level. Her hands were steady. She raised the rifle. She fired. The shot cracked across the yard, and one of the riders pulled hard left, and the horse screamed, and the formation broke apart. Not a hit, but close enough to scatter them. And Cole was already moving already past her, putting himself between her and the gate, with his revolver up, and his voice cutting through the noise with the absolute authority of a man who had done this before and knew exactly what it cost. "Get back," he said to her, not a request. "Get inside and stay low." "I'm not—" "Emily." He turned his head just enough. "I need to know where you are. If I don't know where you are, I can't do this. Get inside and shoot from the window." It was not a concession. It was a tactical instruction. And she understood that, and she moved. She hit the floor of the front room, came up under the window, and had the rifle through the gap before the next rider reached the fence. She counted 4 of them. 4 horses, 4 men, 2 with torches and 2 with guns circling the yard with the particular discipline of men who'd done this kind of work before. Not random violence, organized, planned. Cole fired twice. One rider broke off. Another swung wide. Toby's voice came from the back of the house, high and tight, but not breaking. "There's one at the back, coming around the well." "Hold!" Cole shouted. "I see him. Toby, hold until you have a certain shot." A pause. The sound of the barn eating itself alive, the creak and snap of it, the heat pushing against the windows in waves. Emily kept her eye on the yard, and her breath even, and her trigger finger relaxed until the moment it wasn't. The rider at the gate swung his torch toward the house. She fired. The torch dropped. The rider yanked his horse sideways and retreated fast back through the gate, and the remaining men pulled after him, not fleeing. Regrouping, which was worse in certain ways, because it meant they had a plan, and the plan wasn't over. Silence. Or what passed for silence against the roar of the burning barn. Cole came through the door. Count. 4 riders. 2 torches, 2 guns. 1 retreated after I fired one. You turned. 2 circled out when the formation broke. She was already reloading. "They'll come back." "Not tonight," Cole said. He was breathing hard but controlled. That was a warning. A real attack doesn't retreat after 2 shots. The barn is not a warning, Emily said. Her voice was flat. Something in it had gone very cold and very deep. Cole looked at her. No, he said. It's not. Toby appeared from the back hallway with the boy's old shotgun in his hands, and an expression Emily had not seen on his face before, something past fear, something that had been on the other side of fear and found ground there. The one at the back left when he heard the shots up front, he said. Didn't fire. Good, Cole said. You did right holding. Toby let out a long breath. His hands were shaking. He didn't seem to notice. The 3 of them stood in the front room and listened to the barn burn down. Emily didn't go outside to watch it. She sat at the kitchen table with the rifle across her knees, and she looked at the wall, and she thought about her father, not with grief exactly, more with the particular fury of someone who has been robbed of something that was never only property. Her father had raised those walls. He had pulled the timber himself from the ridge east of the creek. He had built the hayloft with his own hands, and she had sat up there as a child and looked out at the land that he'd said would always be hers. Always yours, he'd said. Long as you're willing to work for it. She was willing. She was willing to do considerably more than work. Cole came and sat across from her. He didn't say anything. He just sat there, and the sitting was enough, the solid present fact of him not trying to fix it, not minimizing it, just bearing witness to it alongside her. After a long time, she said, "Tell me how Kane operates when it escalates." Cole looked at her steadily. He sends a man first. One man, usually someone he trusts, not to do the work to assess, to see what he's dealing with. He paused. After tonight, he'll know we're not leaving. Good, she said. Emily, that's not good. It means he'll come himself, she said. Or send someone with actual authority to negotiate, which means there will be someone to arrest. She met his gaze. I need a name on a warrant. I need Kane connected to tonight, to the fire, to the riders, to the debt transfer. One documented criminal act that a federal marshal can act on. She opened the ledger on the table, not the accounts. Ledger a new one, the one she'd started the night Cole had given her information. Tell me which of his men he uses for exactly this kind of operation. Someone who has warrants in other territories. Someone whose name on a witness account means something. Cole was quiet for a long moment. A man named Decker, he said. Roy Decker. He runs enforcement for Kane's Western Territories. He's wanted in New Mexico on 2 counts of arson and 1 of aggravated assault. He paused. If Decker is here, if he organized tonight, then a federal warrant is already active on him. Emily wrote the name. Would you recognize him? She asked. Yes. Could you testify to his connection to Kane under oath? Cole met her eyes. Yes, he said. I could. She looked at him for a moment. She understood what that meant, understood that testifying connected him publicly to Kane's operation, that it removed whatever protection anonymity had given him, that it made him a target in a more permanent and less avoidable way than simply being on the ranch. Cole, don't, he said. Not unkind, just final. You asked me on the first morning if I'd stand and face it. I said yes. I meant it. She held his gaze. Then she nodded. Reese is in town, she said. At first light, I need to ride to him with everything. The telegram, your testimony about Decker, the names of the shell companies. I need him to send for a federal marshal today. Then we go at first light, Cole said. We, she said, not a question. If Decker organized last night, Cole said, he'll have men watching the road. I'm not letting you ride it alone. She didn't argue. At first light, with the ruins of the barn still smoking in the January cold, Emily and Cole rode for Dust Ridge side by side. Toby stayed behind, armed with the shotgun and specific instructions about what to do, and more importantly, what not to do. The town woke up slowly the way small towns do, and the first person to see them ride in was Hap Briggs at the station, who had been the first person to see Cole arrive, and who now watched them both with the calculating stillness of a man filing information for later use. Emily ignored him. She'd been ignoring Hap Briggs's expressions for 38 years. Calvin Reese opened his door before they knocked, which meant he'd been expecting them, which meant word had already traveled, which meant the fire was not a secret. "I heard," he said. He looked at Cole. "Come in." Emily laid everything on his desk. The ledger notes, the telegram, the company names, the connection between Western Meridian and Kane's New Mexico operation, documented in Cole's own testimony, which she had written out the previous night, and which Cole signed in front of Reese without hesitation. Reese read through all of it without speaking. Then he took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose with 2 fingers. "This is enough for a federal complaint," he said. "Not a guarantee of success, but enough to compel an investigation." He looked at Cole. "You understand that your testimony implicates you as a former associate." "I understand," Cole said. "You're willing to accept that consequence." "I am." Reese looked at him for a moment with the measuring look of a man who has watched many people make promises under pressure and learned to distinguish the ones who mean them. He seemed to find what he was looking for. "I'll send the wire to the marshal's office in Denver this morning," he said. "A federal marshal could be here within 4 days." "We may not have 4 days," Emily said. "No," Reese agreed. "You may not." He put his glasses back on. "In the meantime, Emily, I need you to do something that may feel counterintuitive." "Tell me." "File a complaint with the county sheriff about the fire. Tonight, in writing. Get it on record locally before Kane's people can shape the narrative." He paused. "The county sheriff is not your ally. He may very well be on Morse's payroll. But a written complaint on record protects you legally, even if he does nothing." Emily thought about the county sheriff, a man named Bill Craddy, elected 3 years ago, with the enthusiastic support of the town's merchant class, who had done very little of anything since, with equal enthusiasm. If Craddy does nothing, it's documented that he was asked and chose inaction, Reese said. "That becomes part of the federal record." She stood up. "I'll go this morning." Cole stood with her. Reese walked them to the door and then said quietly, so that only the 2 of them could hear Emily, "Whatever happens in the next few days, do not be alone, either of you." She looked at him. "Decker," Cole said, understanding something she hadn't yet. "There's a man been asking around town," Reese said. "Arrived 2 days ago. Staying at the far boarding house, not Mrs. Aldridge's. Large manscar on the left hand, answers to Roy." He looked at Cole. "Friend of yours?" Cole's face went very still. "No," he said. "Not a friend." The sheriff's office was 3 blocks from Reese's. They walked it. On the second block, Emily felt Cole's pace change, not slowing, just becoming different, a quality of attention that was not about walking. "He's behind us," Cole said quietly, not looking back. Emily kept her eyes forward. "Decker?" "Yes." "Is he alone?" 2 men, one across the street, one behind. Her heart was moving faster than her steps. She kept her chin level and her stride even. "Do we go to Craddy's?" "Yes. Public office witnesses. He won't move on us in a public office." "And when we come out?" "We don't come out the front." They reached Craddy's office and went in, and the deputy behind the desk looked up with the expression of a man interrupted from something more interesting than his job. "I need to file a criminal complaint," Emily said. "My barn was destroyed by arson last night. 4 riders, 2 torches, deliberate and organized. I want it on record." The deputy blinked. "Mrs. Carter," she said. "Vance now, Emily Vance, Rafter C." She put the written account on his desk. She'd prepared it before leaving the ranch because she was Emily Carter, and she prepared things. "I want a copy countersigned and returned to me, today." The deputy looked at the paper. He looked at Cole. He looked back at the paper. Cole said nothing. He was standing with his back to the wall by the door, watching the window utterly still in the way that Emily had learned meant he was at his most alert. "I'll need to get the sheriff," the deputy said. "Please do," Emily said. Craddy came out of the back room with the patient, slightly annoyed bearing of a man who views his office as primarily symbolic. He looked at the complaint. He looked at Emily. He looked at Cole with the particular calculation of a man whose loyalties are not to the law. "This is a serious allegation, Mrs. Vance," he said. It's an accurate one, she said. You have witnesses, my husband, my ranch hand, and the ruins of a barn that didn't burn itself. She held his gaze. I want that countersigned. Craddy took a long breath. He signed it. He handed her the copy. He did not meet her eyes when he did it. We'll look into it, he said. I'm sure you will, Emily said, and her tone made absolutely clear that she was sure of no such thing. She took the copy. Cole opened the back door before she reached it. He'd already found it, already assessed. It already knew the alley it opened onto and which direction it ran. She didn't break stride. They came out the back and moved fast, not running but close, through the alley and around the block and back to their horses from the north side. And they were mounted and out of Dust Ridge inside of 4 minutes from the moment they'd left Craddy's office. On the road home, Cole said, Decker saw us go in. He'll have reported back to Kane by now. Kane will know we went to a lawyer and a sheriff, Emily said. Yes. Good, she said. And she meant it, not bravado, not performance. Strategy. Let him know we're building a case. Let him know we're not running, and we're not hiding, and we are putting his operation on federal record. Let him react to that. He'll react fast, Cole said. Then Reese needs to send that wire today, Emily said, and we need to be ready for whatever comes before Denver answers. Cole was quiet for a moment. Then he said, When Decker comes to the ranch. When, she noted. Not if, when, he confirmed. He'll come as a negotiator first. Kane always sends a negotiator first when there's a legal complication. He'll offer a settlement, something that looks generous on the surface, something you'd have to be desperate to refuse. He paused. Don't refuse it outright. Listen to every word. I need to hear exactly what he says. Because what he offers tells us what Kane is most afraid of losing, Emily said. Cole looked at her. Yes, you've done this before, she said, from the other side. Yes, he said. She thought about that, about the man he'd been, the work he'd done, the families he'd pressured on behalf of a man whose name was now on her land's debt. She thought about the woman and the 2 children Kane had ordered him to burn out. She thought about the moment he'd said no. Cole, she said. The family in New Mexico, the one you refused. He was quiet. Do you know what happened to them? He rode for a moment without answering. They got out, he said. I made sure they knew to leave before I walked away. I don't know where they went. He paused. I think about them sometimes. She looked at the road ahead. That's the man I married, she said. Not soft, not sentimental. Just accurate the way he had been accurate about himself on the platform. And she had learned to speak his language. He said nothing. But something changed in the way he sat in the saddle, something small and deep, like a weight redistributing itself. They rode the rest of the way in silence. When they reached the gate with the cut chain that someone would need to repair, Toby was there waiting, sitting on the top rail with the shotgun across his knees, and his young face tight with the contained anxiety of a boy who'd spent 4 hours not knowing and doing it anyway. Anything? Cole asked. 2 riders came past slow on the road around noon, Toby said. Didn't turn in, just looked. What did they look like? Big, Toby said. Both of them. Didn't have the look of cowboys. Cole and Emily exchanged a look. Get inside, Emily said to Toby. We need to talk. That night she wrote to Reese again, a second letter detailing Decker's presence in town, the men who'd passed the gate, the timeline. She wanted everything documented and dated. Evidence was not dramatic. Evidence was patient and precise and cumulative, and Emily understood it the way she understood ledgers. Every entry mattered, nothing could be reversed, and the total told the truth even when the individual numbers looked small. Cole came in from checking the perimeter and stood in the kitchen doorway. Reese sent the wire, he said. Peter Aldous confirmed it. He saw Reese at the telegraph office himself this afternoon. Emily looked up from her writing. 4 days, she said. Maybe less if the marshal moves fast. Maybe less, Cole agreed. We need to hold 4 days. He looked at her steadily. We've held this long. She held his gaze. She thought about the platform about 11 minutes in a justice's office, about coffee at 5:45 and fence posts and $32 and a revolver in her hands in the January cold. She thought about how 4 weeks ago this man had been a stranger with a scar and a dead man's envelope and an offer she'd called extraordinary. She thought about how much territory trust covers when you're not looking. "Cole," she said. "Yeah. If this goes wrong." "It won't. If it does," she said, patient and firm, because she was a woman who finished her sentences. "I want you to know that whatever happens, I don't regret any of it. Not one morning, not one decision." She paused. "Not you." He was very still for a moment. Then he crossed the kitchen in 3 steps, and he put his hand against the side of her face the first time he'd touched her with intention, with the full weight of what he meant by it, and he said quietly, "It won't go wrong, Emily. I promise you that." She covered his hand with hers, held it there for just a moment. Then she let go, and he let go, and she went back to writing, and he went back to watching the dark. But the warmth of it stayed. 3 hours before dawn, the sound came that Cole had been waiting for since the night on the platform when he'd told a woman the truth about himself and felt the ground shift under him in a way it hadn't in years. Horses. Many horses. Not circling. Coming straight. And a voice from the gate low, carrying with the particular tone of a man accustomed to being the last thing people hear before everything changes. "Vance." The voice paused. "I know you're in there. Kane sends his regards. Roy Decker." Cole was on his feet before the voice finished. Emily was already at the window. Toby was already awake. And outside the gate, visible in the cold pre-dawn dark, were not 4 riders. There were 12. 12 riders. Emily counted them twice because the number didn't seem real, and she was a woman who trusted numbers. 12. Spread across the gate in a loose arc, horses breathing steam into the pre-dawn cold torches in 3 of their hands, and Roy Decker at the front, on a big gray horse, with the unhurried posture of a man who has never once arrived somewhere and doubted the outcome. Cole said, "Stay here," and went out the front door before she could answer. She went out right behind him. He heard her footsteps and didn't tell her to stop. He'd learned by now that telling Emily Carter to stop was a sentence you only constructed if you had a good reason, and I'm afraid for you was not a reason she would accept. They stood together on the porch. The yard between the house and the gate was open and dark, and the ruins of the barn were behind them, and Decker sat on his gray horse and looked at Cole the way men look at each other when they've shared a world, and one of them chose to leave it. "Cole Vance," Decker said. "Thought you were smarter than this." "Thought you were," Cole said. 12 men for 1 ranch. Kane's getting nervous." A pause. Decker didn't move. "Kane's not nervous. Kane's impatient. There's a difference." His eyes moved to Emily with the particular assessment of a man who views women as variables to be calculated. "Mrs. Vance, you've been causing some administrative difficulty." "Good," Emily said. Decker's mouth shifted, not quite a smile. "He's offering one final settlement. Pay value for the property, clear your debt in full, you and your husband walk away intact." He let that sit for a second. "That's a generous offer considering the circumstances." "The circumstances," Emily said, "include a federal criminal complaint filed with the marshal's office in Denver, dated yesterday, signed by a territorial lawyer and a former associate of Victor Kane, who is prepared to testify under oath." She kept her voice level and her chin up, and she looked at Decker the way her father had taught her to look at things that were trying to frighten her directly without blinking. Because the moment you look away, you've told them something they'll use. Whatever Kane is offering, it's not generosity. He's offering because he's been put on federal record, and he wants this resolved before a marshal arrives. Something moved across Decker's face. Not fear, but the recalculation of a man who had arrived expecting a simpler conversation. "You've got 4 days before that marshal gets here," Cole said. "Maybe less. Every man you've got on this property right now is a witness to federal charges." He paused. "Roy, think about what you're doing." "I know exactly what I'm doing," Decker said. "Do you?" Cole stepped forward off the porch onto the yard ground, and his voice dropped to something quieter and more direct, the voice of a man speaking to another man without the audience. "You've done Kane's work for 12 years. You know what happens to the men he's done with. You know what happened to Briggs, to Calloway." A beat. "To Fletcher." Silence. The name Fletcher landed like a stone in still water. Emily watched Decker's jaw tighten, and understood, without knowing the details, that Fletcher had been someone, and that Cole had just used his name as a key. "That's different," Decker said. But his voice had changed. "It's the same," Cole said. "It's always the same. You're useful until you're not, and then you're a liability, and Kane doesn't carry liabilities. You know this, Roy." Another step forward. "There's a federal marshal coming. There's documented evidence of fraud, arson, and criminal conspiracy. When this breaks open, and it will break open, every man standing in this yard is going to have a choice to make. Stand with Kane and go down with him, or cooperate with the federal investigation and walk away with something left." He stopped. "I'm asking you to be smart." Decker stared at him for a long moment. Behind him, the 12 riders were very still, and Emily understood that the stillness was not unity. It was uncertainty. And uncertainty in a group of armed men was either the most dangerous thing in the world or the most useful, depending on what happened next. One of the riders, young not more than 22 on a sorrel horse near the right edge of the arc, said quietly, "Decker, I ain't signed up for federal charges." Another voice from the left. "Nor me." Decker turned in his saddle, and the turn cost him something the authority of a man who doesn't need to look behind him, and Cole saw it and said nothing, and Emily saw it and said nothing, and in the silence of it, the formation began to fracture from the inside. "How many of you?" Emily said loudly and clearly. "We're told this operation had federal attention." Nobody answered. Which was the answer? "How many of you," she said, "were told you were riding on a ranch with a criminal complaint already active in Denver?" The sorrel horse shifted. Its rider didn't stop it. "Kane didn't tell you," Cole said. "Not accusatory, just factual the way you state weather. Because if he had, half of you wouldn't have come. And he needed the numbers." He looked at Decker. "That's what you are to him, Roy. Numbers." Decker sat very still. Then from the road behind them, from the direction of town, from the dark that was beginning to separate itself into pre-dawn gray, came the sound of more horses. But different. Not thundering. Steady, purposeful, the sound of people who had organized themselves and were arriving with intention. Emily turned. She recognized the first horse. Calvin Reese, who had not been on a horse in 3 years to her knowledge, sitting straight in the saddle, with the painful dignity of an old man who has decided that dignity is worth the physical cost. Behind him, Hap Briggs, and the surprise of Hap Briggs on that road. Hap Briggs, who had watched everything and said nothing for years, hit her somewhere unexpected. Behind Hap, Peter Aldous, the Reverend's nephew. Behind Peter, the Hanson brothers from the East Quarter, whose homestead had been one of the properties Reese had mentioned, the ones who'd lost and walked away and apparently decided they weren't walking anymore. Behind them, 7, 8, 9 more ranchers, tradespeople, a woman Emily recognized as May Stanhope from the Mercantile who had a rifle across her saddle, and the expression of someone who has been patient long enough. They came to a stop behind and to either side of Emily and Cole, not dramatically, not with speeches, just present. A body of people who had each made a separate decision and arrived at the same place. Reese looked at Decker. "Roy Decker," he said with the voice of a former judge that still carried the weight of a courtroom. "I'm informing you formally that a federal warrant for your arrest on charges of arson and aggravated assault originating in New Mexico territory has been transmitted to the Dust Ridge County office and will be served upon the arrival of the federal marshal, which I expect within 24 hours. He paused. "You can ride away from here tonight, or you can be here when that marshal arrives. I'd suggest the first option, but the choice is yours." Decker looked at the people behind Emily and Cole. He looked at his own riders, 2 of whom had already turned their horses a quarter to the right, the body language of animals and men who are calculating the direction of an exit. He looked at Cole. Cole looked back at him without flinching. Kane is not going to be happy, Decker said. Kane is going to be in federal custody, Cole said. Whether he's happy about it is beside the point. Another long moment. Decker's jaw worked. Emily watched him run the calculation, what he'd been promised, what it was worth, what it was actually going to cost, what came after, and she watched the moment he arrived at the other side of it. "Riders," Decker said. "We're done here." He turned the gray horse and rode. 8 of the 12 followed immediately. 2 more after a hesitation. The last 2 looked at each other, looked at the assembled people behind Emily, and made the quiet, pragmatic choice of men who have not yet committed enough to a cause to die for it. The yard was empty inside of 2 minutes. Nobody cheered. Nobody said anything for a moment. The silence was not empty. It was full. The way silence is when something large has just moved through a space and the air hasn't settled back yet. Then Hap Briggs, who had watched Emily on the platform the morning Cole arrived and had said nothing, cleared his throat. "Reese sent word around town last night," he said by way of explanation. "Said you might need some company by morning." Emily looked at Reese. "I sent the wire to Denver," Reese said, "and then I sent another wire to every household in the county that Kane's people have touched in the last 2 years. He adjusted himself painfully in the saddle. Turns out there were quite a few of them. May Stanhope rode her horse forward a few steps. "My husband sold our feed account to Western Meridian 6 months ago because he thought he had no choice," she said. "I'd like to have made a different choice." She looked at Emily with the direct, particular steadiness of a woman who has thought about something for a long time and finally found the moment to say it. "We're all in this. We might as well act like it." Emily looked at the people behind her. People she'd lived alongside for years. People she'd passed on the street and traded with and occasionally argued with and never once thought to ask for help because asking for help had never seemed like something available to her. She looked at them and felt something move through her that she did not have a simple name for. It was not just gratitude. It was larger than gratitude. It was the particular shock of discovering that you have not been as alone as you thought, that the isolation you'd accepted as the terms of your situation was at least in part a story you'd been telling yourself. "Thank you," she said. And then, because she was Emily Carter, and she did not leave things unfinished, she said, "I'm going to need all of you to be willing to give written statements to the federal marshal about what you've experienced with Morse and Western Meridian. Reese will coordinate. It's not nothing, it's time and it's paperwork, and it may make you targets temporarily. I need you to know that before you agree." Nobody left. Not one horse turned. "All right then," Emily said. The federal marshal arrived not in 4 days, but in 31 hours, which meant Reese's wire had found him already moving, already following a lead on Western Meridian that had apparently originated from a complaint filed in New Mexico 6 weeks prior. He was a lean, quiet man named Aldous Farrow, who asked precise questions and wrote everything down and looked at Cole's testimony with the careful attention of a man who understands that former insiders are the most dangerous kind of witness. Victor Kane was taken into federal custody 4 days after that at his Santa Fe estate on charges of fraud, conspiracy, racketeering, and criminal arson. Gerald Morse surrendered to Farrow in Denver without being asked twice, which told Emily everything she needed to know about how much Morse had actually believed in Kane's invincibility. Roy Decker was found in a boarding house in Albuquerque and arrested on his existing New Mexico warrants before the week was out. Western Meridian Holdings was dissolved by federal order. The debt on the Rafter C was declared void, not settled void, which meant Emily owed nothing to no one, which meant March 15th came and went like an ordinary day. She sat at the kitchen table that morning with the ledger open in front of her and wrote a single line at the bottom of the accounts page. Debt cleared. Federal order. March 15th, 1883. Then she closed the ledger and put it on the shelf and didn't open it again for 2 weeks. Cole found her standing in the ruins of the barn on a morning in late March when the temperature had finally decided to behave like spring was an actual intention. He didn't announce himself. He just came and stood beside her and looked at what was left the stone foundation her father had laid solid and unchanged the iron hinges that had survived the fire, the basic geometry of the thing that had been. "I can have a frame up in 3 weeks," he said. "Timber from the ridge, same as your father used." She looked at the foundation. "He pulled it himself," she said. "Every piece." "I know," Cole said. "You told me." She turned to look at him. This man who had stepped off a train in January, carrying a dead man's letters, and the honest information that he was not a good man, who had spent 4 months proving that the definition of goodness was more complicated than she'd been taught, who had stood in a yard in the dark with 12 armed riders at the gate and called a dangerous man by the name of someone he'd lost, who had signed his name to a federal document, knowing exactly what it cost, and done it anyway. "You're thinking about leaving," she said. Not an accusation. Just the thing she'd been sitting with for a week, the awareness that the crisis had passed and the arrangement had been a practical one, and practical arrangements had terms. Cole looked at her for a long moment. "No," he said. "Cole, I'm not thinking about leaving," he said, simply, finally, with the same weight he'd put on yes when Pharaoh had asked if he'd testify. "I told you on the first morning that I needed somewhere to be. I've found it." He paused. "Unless you're asking me to go." She looked at the foundation. She thought about the morning she'd stood at the window watching the light in the bunkhouse, and named what she felt as not entirely alone, and decided that was enough. She thought about how much territory she'd traveled from that morning to this one, and how none of it had been what she'd planned, and how all of it had been exactly what she would have chosen if she'd known enough to choose it. "I'm not asking you to go," she said. He nodded once. "I'm asking you," she said, "to help me rebuild the barn." Something happened in his face, the slow arrival of something she'd glimpsed in pieces over 4 months, something she now recognized as the expression of a man who has found solid ground after a very long time without it. "Yes, ma'am," he said. Toby appeared from the direction of the house with a hammer in each hand, and the bright practical energy of a boy who has been waiting for useful work and has found it. He handed one hammer to Cole and looked at Emily with the uncomplicated faith that had made her say "good boy" in the dark of a burning yard. "Where do we start?" he asked. "Same place it always starts," Emily said. She stepped onto the foundation stone, her father's stone solid, unchanged, surviving. "Right here." The frame went up in 18 days. Cole worked from first light. Toby worked beside him, learning without being taught in the way he learned everything by watching and adjusting and keeping pace. Emily worked with them on the days the accounts allowed it, passing timber and driving nails with the steady, unpretentious competence of a woman who had been building and maintaining things her whole life. On the last evening, when the frame was complete and the roof boards were laid and the structure stood whole against the April sky, the three of them sat on the foundation stones in the cooling air and said very little, the way people say very little when the work has spoken for itself. Toby said, "It's bigger than the old one." "Yes," Emily said. "Your father would have liked that." She looked at the new frame, her father's stone and Cole's timber, and Toby's labor, and her own hands in all of it. "Yes," she said. "He would have." Cole was quiet beside her. She could feel the warmth of him in the cooling evening, the solid, certain presence that had reorganized the geometry of her life in January, and was still there in April, and she understood now that it was not going to stop being there, and she understood now that she did not want it to. She reached over and put her hand over his, where it rested on the stone. He turned his palm up and held it. They sat like that while the sky went from blue to purple, to the first deep dark of evening, and Toby tactfully found something to do on the other side of the yard, and the new barn stood above them, like a statement, like an argument won, like the answer to a question she hadn't known she was asking when she tore a telegram apart on a frozen platform in January. She had come to that platform to meet a husband. She had met something considerably more difficult and considerably more real, a man who told her the truth about himself before she could ask who stood beside her when the riders came, who put his name on federal record and his past in the open and stayed anyway, who talked quietly to horses in the dark before first light, because that was simply the kind of man he was underneath everything else he'd been. She had ordered stability. She had received instead a life worth building. And Emily Carter, who had run 312 days alone on her father's land, and counted every one of them, understood in the quiet of that April evening that she was not counting anymore. She was not surviving. She was living. And beside her, Cole Vance, who had been a man with no reason to stay anywhere, had finally found the one place in the world where his hands knew what to do, and his conscience knew what to say, and the ground beneath him held. He had walked away from a burning order once in New Mexico in the dark for a family he'd never meet again. He had walked toward something better ever since, and on the last evening of April, with the new barn standing, and the debt gone, and the warrant served, and the woman beside him holding his hand on her father's stone, he understood that the walking was done. He was home. And that was not a small thing. That was everything.